we're expecting to take place in the next couple of hours. The Oversight Judge of the investigating Directorate against corruption, Takalani Joseph Raulinga, is set to brief the media today on progress in establishing his office and outlining its strategic direction. Well, this comes amid growing concern from the Justice Minister, Mamoloko, Kubayi, and the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Andy Mothibi, over allegations made against IDAC officials and its head, Andrea Johnson, at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. So Kubayi and Mothibi say testimony from the witnesses at the Madlanga Commission, which include serious allegations, has negatively affected public confidence in IDAC operations and raised concerns about its credibility. In the run-up to that press briefing, let's bring in Professor Alex van den Heever from the Wits School of Governance to chat to us a little bit about this. Prof, thank you so much indeed for your time. We really do appreciate it. I mean, let's start with this IDAC oversight body of Judge Raulinga. How important is this body, given the serious allegations we've heard against IDAC and its head, Advocate Andrea Johnson, at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry, which seem to impact the credibility of that institution?
Well, it is important, but the question is whether this ombudsman position that has been established is actually adequate to deal with concerns about the independence and sort of appropriate operation of IDAC. And this is where I think a concern comes in. The mere appointment of a retired judge does not create a proper ombudsman, nor having sort of appointing a judge makes that person independent, either structurally from the Department of Justice, the Minister of Justice, and political entities. And the question is, again, whether this would be a proper oversight body. So what would be required is a proper statutory framework for an ombudsman, which isn't in place. This is very much a ministerially controlled appointment. And there is no public process around the selection of the person. This doesn't mean that the person is incorrect or problematic. But there was no public process, and the legal framework that has been used doesn't establish one. It's very much a closed process and a mere consent requirement. There's an after consultation requirement with the Chief Justice, whereas for a position like this, you would essentially require an independent process, proper nominations, public discussion, so that there's and proper vetting before somebody gets appointed. And then you need the Ombudsman Office itself to be structured in such a way that it is independent from infiltration or influence. But here the Minister of Justice gets to select the people that the Ombudsman will employ and make use of. That again compromises the independence of the organization. The budget itself is not sufficiently ring-fenced from the rest of the budget in the Department of under the portfolio of the Minister of Justice. So the issue is that you require an independent budget and budget process for the establishment of such bodies. That doesn't exist. So my concern is that we might have the veneer of a process to kind of rectify the sense of trust in IDAC, which has clearly been compromised. But you can't address that by putting in place a structure that itself is not adequately independent. We can't just call things independent and assume they are. They're not. You have to design them to be independent.
Yeah, Prof, maybe let me come in there then. What should oversight then look like? You've spoken about a number of things, that just appointing a judge will do nothing to address some of the allegations and seemingly some kind of interference. What does an oversight body then need to look like without it seeming like there's some interference with how IDAC needs to operate, and we don't see ourselves in a situation where there are even allegations made of interference with certain investigations? What does oversight need to look like? Since what you're saying, this particular ombudsman, a retired judge, is not going to be enough in order to at least make it look like something is being done to clean up whatever allegations are being made concerning this important body.
So if we look firstly at the accusations that have been made that the Madlanga Commission is investigating, It's investigating syndicate connections that go right up to senior political people, ministers, all the way through government and through the police services and potentially into IDAC itself. So if you look at that, that political connection is part of the problem. So and that suggests that the NPA is not sufficiently insulated, IDAC's not sufficiently insulated from political influence. And political here, I mean that somebody who's essentially receiving some sort of support from private interests is actually in a position to manipulate that body. So the first step is that ministers don't appoint the ombudsman. The ombudsman should have been appointed through an independent process. So that's the first issue. And there are many ways, a multi-key appointment process, how they're nominated, how they're scrutinized, and how an appointment structure diversifies who is involved so that, in fact, the correct candidate can be appointed and nobody can control that appointment. So that is the first requirement, how you select it. The second is the selection of the personnel in the organization cannot be under the control of a minister. It has to be this independent authority after the people that are appointed at the top are properly independently appointed. Then the budget process has to insulate that organization. It can't be that, one way of squeezing this organization is not to give it adequate funds, which is, I'm afraid, an accusation that is made constantly in relation to the NPA, the Hawks, and various other investigative structures. And people rely on that to explain why they can't do anything. So the budget process has to be in the public interest and independent of individual manipulation. So none of those things have been done in the case of this ombudsman. So we need also a proper model that we establish for ombuds in South Africa. That's only one structure that needs to be independent. It also needs to be that we have independent process for the appointment of the head of IDAC. The NDP, which is not independently appointed, there's too much potential political involvement in the selection of those crucial posts. And as a consequence, we're dealing with the Madlanga Commission, where there is an array of interests that have invaded our investigative structures, our prosecutorial structures that are supposedly meant to be independent, but quite clearly are not insulated. And that is where the problem comes in.
Prof, we know that, the IDAC head advocate, Andrea Johnson, is now back at work after an illness that led her to being unable to testify at the Madlanga Commission. There are now calls for her suspension in light of what we heard. After, the witness testimony at that very commission, where Advocate Johnson is accused of sharing contents of an assault docket involving suspended crime intelligence Major General Feroz Khan. Well, these are serious allegations, but I must say just mere allegations, of course. But should she be suspended in the interim pending an investigation into the serious allegations that have been made? We saw the statement from the Minister of Justice and the head of the National Directorate of Public Prosecutions, where I think in a very long time, the structure of that press release speaks to serious concerns that they're raising on their part. Should she be suspended pending an investigation into her fitness to hold office?
So I don't want to pronounce on what the public bodies should do. She is clearly compromised by what has been stated in public, but all the evidence hasn't yet been fully disclosed and interrogated. And I think that process has to conclude, and she must appear at the Madlanga Commission. So it was also suspicious that she suddenly fell ill and couldn't be there. So she needs to answer to these allegations and expeditiously, and then a decision should be made on whether or not she's suspended. But I think part of it is also, if she is suspended, who takes over? And this is where a concern comes in, because the allegation is that IDAC itself is compromised. And who's been responsible for the appointments in IDAC? So will the person who takes over from IDAC also be independent and above scrutiny? So I think there's a serious problem to be dealt with, and it shouldn't only be located with an individual. We have to look at it as part of a systemic problem. We have to ask the question, why would there be a relationship between Feroz Khan, who has inexplicable wealth? Why would there be such a relationship between that person and IDAC as well? It's extremely concerning. But none of them have appeared yet to answer in public. And this is part of the problem. We've had these people in very senior, powerful positions, and they appear to be themselves insulated from public scrutiny. And to some degree, there's been a sort of a lax attitude historically in dealing with all of these cases, which talks to the systemic nature of the problem. If these people are protected, how are they protected? Who's protecting them? And how is that structure allowing that to happen? It means people in powerful positions are severely compromised. And we have to look at accountability systems and selection processes that don't allow this to happen. We can't just individualize and personalize it. We've got to look at what structures have permitted this to happen. It's extremely concerning. And there are multiple cases that have not been followed up by IDAC, by the NPA, that raise serious questions. And just the simplest one that many people will refer to is the Tembisa case, which inexplicably isn't one that is being prioritized by IDAC for full investigation and prosecution. And you have to ask the question, have they really not got enough evidence to follow through on all the people that have been identified by News 24 instead of by proper public authorities and the SIU? Why is there no action taken? Why are HR matters prioritized and not those? So, this raises a question as to how widespread this failure to actually investigate actual corruption it raises a concern about the historical independence beyond just the Feroz Khan matter, which is obviously extremely concerning.
So would you believe then, Prof, maybe in light of what we've heard, and given that those allegations, and I must say allegations have not yet been tested, it's imperative for the head of IDAC to appear before the Madlanga Commission. We hear that could possibly be next week, to give her side of the story, no matter what happens next, whether there is a decision to suspend her or not, but she has to appear before the Madlanga Commission to answer to the allegations that have been made.
There's no way that she can avoid appearing at Madlanga and accounting for everything that has been disclosed. And the fact that she hasn't to date is already concerning. So that is the first step. What is useful, the Madlanga Commission has got a lot of public respect because everything that it's doing is in the public eye, and there is and the quality of the work and investigation and the systematic nature of the questioning improves public trust in such an organization. Now, what we have to do is to say, well, what are the conditions that make Madlanga Commission trustworthy that don't apply to many of our other public organizations? And those we need to apply. And the fact that a body like that becomes scary to individuals who compromised is also important. That's the power of getting our institutions right. Madlanga is an example, and what we should get out of this process are structural changes in the way we appoint the heads of our key structures in government. They've clearly been compromised. And just to give another example, the Zondo Commission outcome, unlike the Madlanga Commission, which is going immediately into investigations, was all the documentation and information was stored by the department in the Department of Justice and was not transferred to the NPA for investigation and follow-up. And for some reason, IDAC and the NPA just sat on their hands and allowed that situation to continue for years. So that has actually compromised those investigations. And you have to ask, why were they so lackluster in pursuing that information, and why was the Department of Justice sitting on that information? So that raises the question: is that same, a Minister of Justice who's appointing the ombudsman for IDAC, that is problematic, because it means that that people who are potentially compromised or in a position to be compromised are actually the ones making the appointments into these organizations. So and then a further issue, if we go right back to the Scorpions, is that people attack that because supposedly it was making political decisions. Well, that is an institutional matter. They shut it down politically because it was investigating politically compromised individuals, but nobody corrected the structures so that you would never be able to make the accusation that there is a political agenda behind them. You create the right appointment structure, budgeting structure, and independence, and nobody can argue political interference.
Prof, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on SABC News. That was a Wits School of Governance Professor Alex van den Heever, unpacking the impact of the allegations on IDAC's credibility and public trust.